The frost had claimed the valleys of Northumberland 3 weeks before Advent, and with it whatever remained of hope in the Ashford household. Edmund Ashford stood at the window of what had once been his father's study, watching the December wind bend the skeletal branches of the oak trees that lined the crumbling estate. The glass was cracked in 2 places, wounds he could no longer afford to mend, and through those fissures the cold crept in like an unwelcome guest, settling into his bones with the patience of inevitability. He was 31 years old, the last of the Ashford name, and he was watching his world collapse with the slow, terrible grace of autumn leaves surrendering to gravity. Behind him, the fire had dwindled to embers. There was no more wood to feed it. The servants, those who remained, had been sent to bed early, for darkness cost nothing, and candles had become a luxury the household could no longer justify. Only Edmund remained awake, his shadow stretching long and thin across the bare stone floor, a specter of the man he had once believed he would become. The letter lay open on the desk behind him, its words seared into his memory with the precision of a brand. Lord Ashford, it is with regret that I must inform you that no further extension of credit can be granted. The debts accrued by your late father, compounded by the failures of the harvest and the obligations of the estate, have rendered your position untenable. Unless payment of 200 gold sovereigns is received by the Feast of the Epiphany, I am obligated by law to seize the remaining assets of Ashford Manor, including all lands, holdings, and the residence itself. 200 gold sovereigns. Edmund might as well have been asked to pluck the moon from the sky. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, feeling the bite of winter against his skin, and allowed himself one moment of weakness, one breath in which the enormity of his failure settled upon his shoulders like a shroud. His mother lay upstairs in the chamber she had not left in 4 months, her lungs ravaged by an illness that no physician could name and no medicine could cure. His younger sister Eliza, barely 17, had sold her only pair of silk gloves to buy herbs from the apothecary, herbs that had done nothing but grant their mother a few hours of restless sleep. And his brother Thomas, only 12 years old, had begun to cough. The same cough, the same rattle in the chest, the same slow drowning in one's own body. Edmund closed his eyes. He had tried everything. He had written to every lord who had once called his father friend. He had offered his services as a clerk, a steward, a common laborer. He had swallowed his pride so many times that he no longer remembered the taste of dignity. Nothing. No one would hire a ruined man. No one would lend to a name synonymous with debt. And so he had come to this, standing alone in the dark, watching the snow begin to fall, wondering if the cold might take them all before the creditors did. A knock at the door shattered the silence. Edmund turned, his heart lurching with the irrational hope that perhaps, some miracle had arrived in the form of a messenger bearing news of forgotten inheritance or unexpected mercy. But when he opened the door, he found only Marta, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Ashfords since before Edmund's birth. Her face was drawn, her eyes bright with something that might have been fear, or might have been wonder. "My lord," she whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "There is a visitor." "At this hour?" "A carriage arrived not 10 minutes past. A woman. She says she will speak only with you." Edmund frowned. What woman would travel in such weather at such an hour? Marta's hands twisted in her apron. "She did not give her name, my lord, but her carriage, I have never seen its like. Black as midnight, with a crest I do not recognize, and her manner—" The old woman hesitated. "She speaks as one accustomed to being obeyed." Edmund's frown deepened. His first instinct was to send the stranger away. What business could anyone have with him that could not wait until morning? But something in Marta's expression gave him pause. "Where is she?" "I placed her in the parlor. I lit the candles we had left. I hope I did not overstep." "You did well." Edmund straightened his coat, threadbare at the elbows, but still presentable if one did not look too closely, and moved toward the parlor. "Return to your quarters, Marta. Whatever this is, I will handle it alone. The old woman nodded, but her eyes followed him down the corridor with an expression that Edmund could not quite decipher. The parlor had once been the pride of Ashford Manor, a room of velvet and mahogany, of portraits in gilded frames and carpets imported from the East. Now, the velvet had faded to the color of dust, the mahogany was scarred by years of neglect, and the portraits had been sold one by one to pay for grain and medicine. But in the candlelight, with shadows softening the evidence of decay, the room retained a ghost of its former grandeur. And standing before the cold hearth, her back to the door, was a woman who seemed to have stepped out of another world entirely. She was tall, nearly as tall as Edmund himself, and dressed in a gown of deep burgundy velvet that caught the candlelight like liquid wine. Her hair was the color of chestnuts in autumn, swept up in an elaborate arrangement that spoke of hours spent before a mirror, and when she turned to face him, Edmund felt the breath leave his lungs. She was beautiful. Not in the soft, demure way of the village girls who had once cast hopeful glances in his direction, but in a way that was sharp and commanding, like the edge of a blade wrapped in silk. Her features were striking. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips the color of crushed berries, and her eyes, dark as winter midnight, regarded him with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see through his skin to the marrow of his bones. "Lord Ashford," she said, and her voice was low and rich, like honey poured over velvet. "Forgive the intrusion. I know the hour is late." Edmund found his voice, though it took longer than he would have liked. "You have the advantage of me, madam. You know my name, but I do not know yours." A smile touched her lips, not warm, but not unkind. "I am Isabella Ravensworth, Duchess of Blackmore." The name struck Edmund like a physical blow. Everyone knew of the Duchess of Blackmore, widow of the late Duke, who had died under circumstances that remained the subject of whispered speculation in every great hall in England. Mistress of the largest fortune in the northern counties, a woman who had never remarried despite countless offers, who ruled her estates with an iron will, and who was said to be as ruthless in business as any man who had ever sat in Parliament. She was also, Edmund realized with a start, at least 10 years his senior, though one would never guess it from her appearance. Whatever sorcery she employed to maintain her youth, it was remarkably effective. "Your Grace." Edmund executed a bow that felt clumsy and inadequate. "I confess I am at a loss. What brings a woman of your standing to my door at such an hour?" The Duchess moved toward him, her gown whispering against the floor. "Desperation, Lord Ashford. Yours." Edmund stiffened. "I beg your pardon?" "I know your situation." Her dark eyes held his without apology. "I know about the debts, the illness that ravages your mother, the creditors who circle your estate like wolves waiting for a wounded deer to fall. I know that unless a miracle occurs before the feast of the Epiphany, you and your family will be cast into the streets." Each word landed like a stone in Edmund's chest. He wanted to deny it, wanted to summon some shred of pride and demand to know how she had come by such intimate knowledge of his failures, but what would be the point? She spoke only the truth. "You seem remarkably well informed," he said quietly. "I make it my business to be informed." The Duchess stopped before him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something dark and floral like roses that had bloomed in shadow. "And I find myself in a position to offer you a solution." Edmund's heart began to beat faster. "What sort of solution?" For a long moment, the Duchess simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she reached into the folds of her gown and withdrew a small velvet pouch, which she placed in his hands. The weight of it was unmistakable. Edmund's fingers trembled as he loosened the drawstring and peered inside. Gold. Dozens of coins, each one worth more than everything remaining in Ashford Manor combined. "There is more," the Duchess said. 300 gold sovereigns in total. Enough to pay your debts, restore your estate, and provide for your family through the winter. Enough to summon the finest physicians from London for your mother. Enough to give your brother and sister the future they deserve. Edmund stared at the gold in his hands, his mind reeling. 300 sovereigns. It was more than enough. It was salvation. But he had lived long enough to know that nothing in this world came without a price. "What do you want in return?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Duchess smiled, and this time, there was something in that smile that made Edmund's blood run cold. "One night, Lord Ashford. One night in my chambers, in my bed, serving whatever purpose I require of you. In exchange, your family's future is secured." The words hung in the air between them like frost. Edmund felt the room tilt beneath his feet. Surely he had misheard. Surely this elegant, powerful woman had not just propositioned him as though he were a commodity to be purchased. "You cannot be serious," he managed. "I am always serious." The Duchess's eyes did not waver. "I am a widow, Lord Ashford. I have been alone for 7 years. I have no desire to remarry. Marriage brings complications I have no patience for, but I am not made of stone. I have appetites. And I have observed you from afar. Your bearing, your dignity, your refusal to beg even when begging might save you. You interest me. And so I offer you a transaction. One night of sin in exchange for your family's salvation." Edmund's hands shook. The pouch of gold felt suddenly hot in his palms, as though it might burn through his skin. He thought of his mother, gasping for breath in her bed. He thought of Thomas, so young, already showing the signs of the same illness. He thought of Eliza, who had not complained once even as she sold her belongings piece by piece to keep them alive. And he thought of himself, his honor, his pride, the principles he had clung to even as everything else was stripped away. What was honor worth if his family died because of it? "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice hollow. The Duchess shrugged, a gesture of elegant indifference. "Then you refuse. I will take my gold and return to Blackmoor, and you will face the consequences of your debts alone. I am not a monster, Lord Ashford. I will not force you, but I will not make this offer twice." She turned and moved toward the door, her gown trailing behind her like a river of blood. "Wait." The word escaped Edmund before he could stop it. The Duchess paused, one hand on the doorframe. She did not turn. Edmund closed his eyes. He saw his mother's face, pale and drawn. He heard Thomas's cough echoing through the empty halls. He felt the weight of the gold in his hands, the weight of salvation or damnation. "When?" he asked. Now she turned, and there was something in her eyes, triumph, perhaps, or satisfaction, or something darker still. "Tomorrow night. My carriage will return for you at sunset. You will come to Blackmoor Castle, and you will stay until dawn. After that, you are free to return to your life, and the gold is yours to keep." Edmund opened his eyes and met her gaze. "I accept." The words tasted like ashes on his tongue. The Duchess smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Edmund feel as though he had just signed away something far more precious than a single night. "I knew you would," she said softly. "Men like you always do." And then she was gone, leaving only the scent of roses and the weight of gold in Edmund's trembling hands. He stood alone in the parlor for a long time after, staring at nothing, feeling the last vestiges of his pride crumble to dust. Tomorrow night, he would become a sinner. Tonight, he would pray for forgiveness he did not deserve. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If stories that blend romance, sacrifice, and moral courage speak to your soul, if you believe that love can bloom even in the darkest circumstances, then this is where you belong. Subscribe now so you never miss a tale. The sun was a wound on the western horizon when the black carriage returned. Edmund had spent the day in a state of suspended dread, moving through the hours like a man walking toward his own execution. He had visited his mother, sitting beside her bed while she slept, memorizing the lines of her face as though he might never see her again. He had played chess with Thomas, letting the boy win, watching the brightness in his eyes and trying not to think about the shadow that had begun to gather there. He had embraced Eliza, who had sensed something wrong but had not pressed, trusting him as she had always trusted him. He had told none of them about the Duchess. What would he say? I am selling myself to save you. The words would not come. Perhaps they never would. Now, as the carriage rolled to a stop before the manor gates, Edmund descended the front steps with the hollow certainty of a man who had already surrendered. The coachman was silent, his face hidden beneath a black hood. He opened the carriage door without a word, and Edmund climbed inside, settling onto the velvet seat as the door closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid. The interior was dark, lit only by a small lantern that swung gently with the motion of the carriage. Across from Edmund sat a young woman, a servant by her plain dress and downcast eyes, who handed him a folded note without speaking. Edmund opened it. The journey to Blackmoor will take 3 hours. Rest if you can. You will need your strength. No signature, no explanation. Only the Duchess's elegant script, as commanding on paper as her voice had been in person. Edmund tucked the note into his coat and leaned back against the seat, closing his eyes. Rest. As though rest were possible when his mind churned with questions and his heart beat with a fear he could not name. The carriage rolled on through the gathering darkness, and Edmund allowed himself to think, truly think, about what he was doing. He was not naive. He understood the nature of the transaction the Duchess had proposed. She wanted companionship, yes, but also control. She had chosen him not because he was handsome or charming, though he had been told he possessed both qualities in adequate measure, but because he was desperate. Because his desperation gave her power over him. Because she could buy him, and they both knew it. And yet, there was something else in her eyes when she had looked at him. Something beyond mere appetite or calculation. A hunger, yes, but not only for flesh. A loneliness so profound that it had calcified into armor. The Duchess of Blackmoor was not simply a predator. She was a woman who had learned to survive in a world that devoured the weak, and she had survived by becoming the thing she feared. Edmund recognized that look. He saw it in the mirror every morning. Perhaps that was why, despite everything, a small part of him did not hate her. Blackmoor Castle rose from the moors like a specter from legend. It was vast, far larger than Edmund had imagined, with towers that pierced the sky like black teeth and walls of stone so dark they seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. The windows glowed with the warm light of countless candles, but there was nothing welcoming in that glow. It was the light of a beast's eye, watching from the darkness. The carriage passed through iron gates that groaned with age, and Edmund caught a glimpse of the castle's crest carved into the stone above. A raven with wings spread wide, clutching a bleeding heart in its talons. The Ravensworth crest. He had heard stories of it, of course. Every child in England had. The Ravensworths had ruled these lands since the time of the conquest, and their history was written in blood. Betrayals, murders, alliances forged and broken. The family had survived for centuries by being more ruthless than their enemies. And now the last of them, this widow, this Duchess, waited for him inside. The carriage stopped before the castle's main entrance, and Edmund descended on legs that felt disconnected from his body. Servants appeared from nowhere, silent and efficient, ushering him up the steps and through doors of black oak that swung open as if by their own will. The entrance hall was cavernous, lit by chandeliers that dripped with crystals and cast rainbows across the stone floor. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes and battles lined the walls, their colors faded, but their violence preserved. And at the far end of the hall, standing before a fire that roared in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, was the Duchess. She had changed since the night before. Her gown was black now, black as the raven on her crest, and it clung to her figure in a way that left little to the imagination. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of dark silk, and her eyes gleamed in the firelight with an intensity that made Edmund's mouth go dry. Lord Ashford. Her voice echoed through the hall, rich and commanding. You came. I gave my word, Edmund replied, and was surprised to find that his voice did not shake. The Duchess smiled, a slow, appreciative smile that sent a shiver down his spine. So you did. A rare quality in these times. Come, we will dine before we proceed to other matters. She turned and walked toward a doorway at the side of the hall, her gown trailing behind her. Edmund followed, feeling as though he were being drawn into a web from which there would be no escape. Dinner was a strange affair. They sat at opposite ends of a long table in a dining hall that could have seated 100, with servants moving silently between them, refilling goblets and replacing courses. The food was extraordinary. Roasted pheasant, venison and wine sauce, fresh bread with butter and honey, fruits that should not have been available in winter, but Edmund found he had no appetite. The Duchess, by contrast, ate with evident pleasure, savoring each bite as though it were a work of art. And between courses, she talked. She spoke of politics, of the king's latest follies and the machinations of the great lords. She spoke of art and music, of books she had read and plays she had seen. She spoke with intelligence and wit, and despite himself, Edmund found himself drawn into the conversation, forgetting for long stretches why he was there at all. It was only when the servants cleared the final course and withdrew that the Duchess's demeanor changed. She rose from her chair and moved toward him, her gown whispering against the floor. Edmund rose as well, his heart hammering in his chest. "You have been a gracious guest," she said, stopping before him. "Courteous, restrained. Not once have you asked why a woman of my position would resort to such measures to secure companionship." Edmund swallowed. "It is not my place to ask." "No, but you have wondered." Her eyes searched his face. "Everyone wonders. They whisper about me in every great hall in England. The Black Widow of Blackmore, the woman who drove her husband to his death, the woman who refuses to remarry because no man could ever satisfy her appetites." She laughed, a bitter, mirthless sound. "Do you know what the truth is, Lord Ashford? The truth is far more pathetic than any rumor. I am lonely. I have been lonely for 7 years. My husband was a monster who beat me and degraded me and made every day of my marriage a living hell. When he died, I wept, not from grief but from relief, and I swore I would never again allow a man to have power over me." Edmund felt something shift in his chest, something that might have been compassion. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I do not want your pity." The Duchess's voice was sharp. "I want your honesty. You are here because you need the gold. I know that. But I want you to tell me, if circumstances were different, if you were not desperate, would you have come?" It was a question Edmund had not expected, and it cut deeper than any blade. He thought of the woman before him, her beauty, her intelligence, her wounds, hidden beneath layers of armor but visible now in the tremor of her voice and the vulnerability in her eyes. "Yes," he said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. "I think I would have." The Duchess stared at him for a long moment, then, slowly, the hardness in her expression softened. "You are either a very good liar," she said quietly, "or a very rare man. I have never been a good liar." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, I do not think you have." She reached up and touched his face, a gentle touch, almost tentative, as though she were testing whether he was real. "Come," she whispered. "The night is not yet over." She took his hand and led him from the dining hall, up a sweeping staircase, down a corridor lined with portraits of Ravensworth's long dead, and finally through a door into a chamber that blazed with candlelight and warmth. The bedchamber of the Duchess of Blackmore. Edmund stood at the threshold, his heart pounding, his hands trembling. And then the door closed behind him, and there was no turning back. The chamber was vast, dominated by a bed draped in curtains of deep crimson that seemed to glow in the candlelight like embers. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries depicting scenes of love and loss. Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot and Guinevere, lovers whose passion had destroyed kingdoms. Edmund stood motionless, acutely aware of every sensation. The warmth of the fire on his skin, the scent of roses and wood smoke, the soft rustle of the Duchess's gown as she moved away from him and toward a table where a decanter of wine stood beside 2 crystal goblets. You are trembling, she observed, pouring wine with steady hands. I have never done this before. She turned, one eyebrow raised. Surely you are not claiming to be a virgin, Lord Ashford. No, Edmund forced himself to meet her eyes. But I have never sold myself. There is a difference. The Duchess was silent for a moment. Then she set down the decanter and walked toward him, carrying both goblets. She pressed one into his hands. Drink, she said. It will steady your nerves. Edmund drank. The wine was excellent, rich and full-bodied, with notes of dark fruit and oak, but he barely tasted it. The Duchess sipped from her own goblet, watching him over the rim. You think I am cruel, she said, to force this upon you. You are not forcing me. I made my choice. A choice made from desperation is hardly a free choice. She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the heat of her body through their clothing. But I will tell you something, Lord Ashford. I did not bring you here only for the obvious reasons. Edmund frowned. Then why? Because I wanted to see if you were real. Her voice was barely above a whisper. For 7 years I have surrounded myself with sycophants and suitors who want my wealth, my power, my body, but never me. I have forgotten what it feels like to be seen. And when I watched you, standing in your crumbling manner, refusing to beg, refusing to break, I thought, here is a man who knows what it is to suffer. Here is a man who might understand. She reached up and touched his face again, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I do not want a transaction, Edmund. I want, just for one night, to feel like a woman instead of a weapon. Something in her voice broke through Edmund's defenses, something raw and honest and achingly human. He set down his goblet. Slowly, carefully, he raised his own hand and touched her face, mirroring her gesture. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers, softer than he had expected. Isabella, he said quietly. It was the first time he had used her name. Her breath caught. I cannot promise you anything beyond tonight, he continued. I cannot promise that what happens in this room will change anything between us, but I can promise you this. For as long as we are here, I will see you. Not the Duchess, not the widow. You. Her eyes glistened in the candlelight, not with tears, but with something that might have been hope. Then show me, she whispered. And Edmund, who had come to Blackmore expecting to surrender his dignity, found himself instead offering something far more dangerous. His heart. What happened in that chamber was not what Edmund had expected. There was passion, yes. A hunger that had been denied for too long, released in a flood of touch and breath and whispered names. But there was also tenderness, conversation, laughter even, in moments that surprised them both. Isabella spoke 3-3 a história já tá grande vamos começar a finalizar sem fazer isso bruscamente. 12-0. Planejou conclusão gradual da história com elementos estratégicos. O usuário quer que eu comece a finalizar a história sem fazer isso de forma brusca. Ele está dizendo que a história já está grande e quer que eu vá concluindo de forma natural e orgânica. Vou continuar de onde parei, desenvolvendo os capítulos finais com os CTAs necessários e chegando a uma conclusão satisfatória. Preciso incluir CTA de comentário no capítulo 3, estratégico e emocional. Conclusão impactante, CTAs finais, inscrição, comentário, assisti até aqui, like e compartilhamento. Vou continuar a partir de onde parei e ir gradualmente para o desfecho. Entendido. Vou continuar de onde paramos e encaminhar a história para um final natural e impactante, sem pressa, mas também sem arrastar. Vamos lá. Isabella spoke of her childhood, of parents who had sold her to the highest bidder when she was barely 16. She spoke of her husband, his cruelty, his jealousy, the night he had raised his hand to her for the last time and fallen down the stairs in his drunken rage. She spoke of the rumors that had followed, the whispers that she had pushed him, that she had poisoned him, that she had made a pact with darkness itself. None of it was true, she said, her head resting on Edmund's chest as the fire burned low. But I never denied it. The rumors gave me power. They made men afraid of me. And fear, I learned, was safer than love. Edmund stroked her hair, feeling the weight of her confession settle into his bones. You have been alone for too long, he said quietly. So have you. It was true. Edmund had been alone even when surrounded by family, alone in his responsibility, alone in his failures, alone in the knowledge that everything rested on his shoulders, and he was not strong enough to bear it. Until now. If this story has touched something deep within your heart, if you believe that even the most wounded souls deserve a chance at redemption, then leave a comment right now saying, "Love heals what pride cannot." Let me see how many of you believe in the power of second chances. Dawn crept through the windows of Blackmore Castle like a thief, stealing the shadows that had sheltered them through the night. Edmund woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar warmth surrounding him. The silk sheets, the lingering scent of roses, the soft breathing of the woman beside him. For a moment, he forgot where he was. For a moment, he was simply a man waking beside a woman who had seen him, truly seen him, for the first time in years. Then memory returned, and with it, the weight of reality. He had fulfilled his part of the bargain. The night was over. It was time to return to Ashford Manor, to his family, to the life that awaited him, now secured by gold that had been earned in ways he would never speak of. But as he moved to rise, a hand caught his wrist. Stay. Isabella's voice was soft, stripped of the commanding edge that had defined her the night before. She looked younger in the morning light, vulnerable in a way that made Edmund's chest ache. The agreement was for one night, he said gently. I know. She sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders. I am not asking you to break your word. I am asking you to extend it. Stay for breakfast. Stay until the noon bells. Give me a few more hours before I must become the Duchess again. Edmund hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave, to take the gold and flee before this entanglement became something more complicated than a simple transaction. But when he looked into her eyes, those dark, wounded eyes that had shown him glimpses of a soul as battered as his own, he found he could not refuse. Until noon, he agreed. Her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a long winter. They breakfasted in a small parlor overlooking the castle's gardens, which lay dormant beneath a blanket of frost. The intimacy of the night had not faded with the daylight. If anything, it had deepened, settling into something quieter, but no less profound. Isabella spoke of her plans for the estate, the tenants she wished to help, the schools she dreamed of building, the legacy she hoped to leave behind. Edmund listened, offering thoughts when asked, and found himself surprised by the passion that burned beneath her carefully cultivated exterior. She was not the monster the rumors painted her. She was a survivor, a woman who had clawed her way out of hell and built a fortress to ensure she would never be vulnerable again. And yet, with him, she had chosen to be vulnerable. That meant something. Edmund was not sure what, but he knew it meant something. When the noon bells finally tolled, they stood together at the castle's entrance, the black carriage waiting to return him to his old life. The gold has been loaded into the carriage, Isabella said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying something she would not name. 300 sovereigns, as promised. Your family's future is secure. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, but Edmund did not know what else to say. Isabella nodded, her expression smoothing into the mask she wore for the world. Go, Lord Ashford. Save your family. Forget this night if you wish. I will not hold you to anything beyond our agreement. Edmund stepped toward the carriage, then he stopped. He turned back. What if I do not wish to forget? Isabella's mask cracked, just for an instant, and in that crack, Edmund saw hope and fear warring for dominance. Then you are a fool, she whispered. And I am an even greater fool for wanting you to be. Edmund crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He took her face in his hands, gently, reverently, and kissed her. Not with the passion of the night before, but with something deeper, a promise, a beginning. When he pulled away, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I will return," he said. "Once my family is settled, once my mother is well, I will return." "You cannot promise that." "I can, and I do." He kissed her once more, a brief, fierce thing, and then he was in the carriage and the horses were moving, and Blackmore Castle was shrinking behind him like a dream from which he was slowly waking. But Edmund did not feel as though he were waking. He felt, for the first time in years, as though he were finally coming alive. Ashford Manor had never looked so small. Edmund descended from the carriage as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The crumbling walls, the overgrown gardens, the windows patched with cloth, all of it seemed diminished somehow, as though he were seeing it through new eyes. But the faces that greeted him made everything else fade to insignificance. Eliza was the first to reach him, throwing herself into his arms with a cry of relief. "Edmund, we were so worried. You left without a word. Where have you been?" "I will explain everything," he promised, holding her tight. "But first, there is something I must show you." He led his sister to the carriage, where the coachman was already unloading the strongbox that contained the gold. When Edmund opened the lid, Eliza's gasp echoed through the courtyard. "Edmund, how?" "It does not matter how." He took her hands in his. "What matters is that we are saved. The debts will be paid. Mother will have the best physicians in England. Thomas will have medicine. You will have a future." Tears streamed down Eliza's face. "I do not understand. Who would give us such a fortune?" Edmund hesitated. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, heavy, but not shameful, not anymore. "A friend," he said finally. "Someone who saw our need and chose to help." It was not the whole truth, but it was not a lie either, and for now, it was enough. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Edmund paid the creditors, watching with grim satisfaction as the vultures who had circled his family retreated in disappointment. He summoned physicians from London, the finest money could buy, who examined his mother and declared that while her illness was serious, it was not beyond treatment. With proper care and medicine, they said, she might yet recover. Thomas's cough, caught early, responded quickly to treatment. Within a month, the boy was running through the halls again, his laughter echoing off the walls like music, and Eliza, dear, faithful Eliza, began to bloom. With the weight of survival lifted from her shoulders, she rediscovered the joy she had buried deep within herself. She smiled again. She sang again. She spoke of the future as though it were something to anticipate rather than dread. Edmund watched his family heal, and he felt something heal within himself as well. But even as the days grew brighter, his thoughts returned again and again to Blackmore Castle, to Isabella, to the promise he had made. He had written to her twice, formal letters, carefully worded, expressing his gratitude and his hope that they might meet again. She had replied once, briefly, thanking him for his kind words and wishing his family well. Nothing more. Edmund told himself it was enough. He told himself that the night they had shared was a singular thing, never meant to be repeated. He told himself that a ruined gentleman and a powerful Duchess could never truly belong to each other. But late at night, when the house was quiet and he was alone with his thoughts, he could not stop remembering the way she had looked at him, the way she had whispered his name, the way she had asked him with such raw vulnerability to see her as more than what the world believed her to be. He had promised to return, and Edmund Ashford was not a man who broke his promises. Spring arrived like a benediction, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the frozen earth. Ashford Manor, restored to something approaching its former dignity, stood proud against the brightening sky. And Edmund stood at its gates, his bags packed, his horse saddled, his heart pounding with an anticipation he had not felt in years. "You are really going, then," Eliza said, standing beside him with her arms crossed, but her eyes were soft, knowing. "I must. To see her? The one who saved us?" Edmund looked at his sister, this young woman who had grown so wise in the crucible of hardship, and nodded. "You love her," Eliza said. It was not a question. I do not know if what I feel is love. Edmund mounted his horse, settling into the saddle. But I know that I cannot rest until I find out. Eliza smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. Then go, brother, and do not return until you have your answer. Edmund leaned down and kissed her forehead. Take care of them while I am gone. Always. And then he was riding, the wind in his face, the road stretching before him like a ribbon of possibility. Blackmoor Castle was different in spring. The moors that had seemed so bleak in winter now burst with color. Purple heather, yellow gorse, white hawthorn blossoms that perfumed the air with sweetness. The castle itself seemed less forbidding, its dark stones softened by climbing ivy and the golden light of the afternoon sun. Edmund dismounted at the gates, his heart hammering as he approached the entrance. The servants recognized him. Whispers rippled through the staff as he was escorted into the great hall, where the Duchess, Isabella, stood before the same hearth where he had first seen her, 3 months ago, in another lifetime. She had her back to him. She did not turn. I was told you had come, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I confess I did not believe it. I promised I would return. Men make many promises. Now she turned, and Edmund saw that she had changed. Not physically. She was still beautiful, still commanding. But there was something guarded in her expression that had not been there before. A wall, rebuilt. Few keep them. I am not most men. No. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You are not. Silence stretched between them, heavy, charged, full of things unsaid. Edmund took a step forward. I did not come for gold. I did not come for obligation. I came because I have thought of nothing but you since the day I left this place. Isabella's mask flickered. You should not say such things. Why not? They are true. Because I am not a woman men love, Edmund. Her voice cracked on his name. I am a woman men fear or desire or seek to conquer. I am not soft. I am not gentle. I have too many scars and too many sins, and I will not pretend to be something I am not. Edmund crossed the remaining distance between them. He took her hands in his, those elegant, capable hands that had touched him with such tenderness, and raised them to his lips. I do not want you to pretend, he said quietly. I want you exactly as you are, scars and sins and all. Isabella stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face for deception and finding none. You cannot mean that. I have never meant anything more in my life. For a long moment, she did not move, did not breathe. Then, slowly, the wall behind her eyes crumbled. I am afraid, she whispered. So am I. Edmund pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. But I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. Isabella buried her face in his chest, and for the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to weep. Not tears of grief or pain, but tears of release, tears of hope. They were married in the small chapel of Blackmoor Castle 1 month after Edmund's return. It was a quiet ceremony. No great lords, no political alliances, no spectacle. Only the people who mattered. Edmund's mother, recovered enough to travel and weeping with joy. Eliza and Thomas, radiant in new clothes. The servants of both households gathered to witness the union that no one had expected. Isabella wore white, not the black she had wrapped herself in for 7 years, but white, like a bride emerging from a long winter into spring. Her hands trembled as Edmund slipped the ring onto her finger, but her voice was steady as she spoke her vows. I take you as my husband, she said. Not because I need protection, but because I choose you. I choose your kindness. I choose your honor. I choose the way you look at me as though I am worthy of love. Edmund raised her hand to his lips. I take you as my wife, he replied, not because of your wealth or your title, but because you showed me that even in the darkest night there can be light. You are my light, Isabella, and I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of yours." When they kissed, the chapel erupted in applause. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, both Edmund and Isabella felt what they had believed impossible. They felt home. The gardens of Blackmore Castle were in full bloom. Edmund walked through the rose arbor, breathing in the perfume of 100 flowers, feeling the warmth of the summer sun on his face. In the distance, he could hear Thomas laughing as he chased one of the castle dogs across the lawn. Eliza sat beneath an oak tree, reading a book of poetry, her face peaceful in a way it had never been during the dark years. And ahead, seated on a stone bench overlooking the valley, was Isabella. Her hand rested on the swell of her belly, round now, heavy with the child they had created together. Their child. The heir to both Ashford and Blackmore, born not of transaction, but of love. Edmund sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Isabella smiled, a soft, unguarded smile that still had the power to steal his breath. "I am thinking that 1 year ago, I was the loneliest woman in England. I had everything the world values, wealth, power, beauty, and none of it meant anything. I was a fortress with no one inside." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes shining. "And then you came. A ruined gentleman with nothing to offer but his honesty and his heart. And you gave me something no amount of gold could ever buy. What was that? A reason to open the gates." Edmund leaned forward and kissed her, gently, tenderly, with all the love he had discovered he possessed. "I should thank you," he murmured against her lips. "For what?" "For taking a chance on a desperate man. For seeing past the transaction to the person beneath. For teaching me that sometimes the darkest bargains lead to the brightest futures." Isabella laughed, a sound that still surprised him with its warmth, even after all these months. "We saved each other, Edmund. That is the truth of it. You gave me hope when I had forgotten how to hope, and I gave you a future when yours seemed lost. We are not debtor and creditor. We are partners, equals, two wounded souls who found healing in each other." Edmund placed his hand over hers, feeling the life growing beneath her skin. "And now we will be three." "And now we will be three," Isabella agreed. They sat together in the garden as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Behind them, the castle that had once seemed so forbidding now glowed with warmth and welcome. Around them, the sounds of family, laughter, conversation, the simple music of lives intertwined, filled the air. Edmund thought of the man he had been 1 year ago, desperate, broken, ready to sell his soul for survival. He thought of the night that had changed everything, the night he had walked into Blackmore Castle expecting to lose his dignity and had instead found something far more precious. Love, family, purpose, a life worth living. He tightened his grip on Isabella's hand and smiled. They had begun in darkness, in desperation and loneliness and the kind of bargain that should have destroyed them both. But they had emerged into light, and the light, Edmund knew, was only beginning. If you watched this far, it is because this story found a place in your heart. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end, so I can know who you are, who truly cherishes these tales of love, sacrifice, and redemption." Your presence here means more than you know. If this story moved you, please leave a like and share it with someone who needs to believe that even the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest endings. And if you have not yet subscribed, now is the moment. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another tale, because here we believe that love is not a fairy tale, but a choice made every day by imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other. Until the next story, may you find your own light in the darkness.